Hey everybody, it's Dave Dugdale, learningvideo.com. Thank you so much for purchasing this course. You're going to learn a ton over the next 5 or 6 hours. I'm going to do a lot of different tests. So basically you don't have to, saving you weeks, if not months of time, testing this camera to get the most out of it. All right, you should have no buyer's remorse after buying this camera. This thing is fantastic for the price, for all the different features and specs that you get. I don't think there's another camera out there that can really match it. All right, this is a beginner level course. This is perfect for somebody who's never picked up this type of camera before. All right, there's another section at the end that's very advanced. It's on log, S-Log, which is hard to expose for, and it's also hard to grade for as well. We've got S-Log 2 and S-Log 3. So what I'd say if you're a beginner, I'd say go ahead and skip it. Come back maybe 5 or 6 months later after you've been using the camera for a while and you're looking to get more dynamic range out of the camera. All right, I'm going to be covering everything in the manual as it pertains to video. I'm going to be covering some stills related items because we're going to make movies from time lapses. So if you go into this manual and you find it's very lacking, which it definitely is, there's a lot of things that's not covered. There's a lot more information on the online help guide from Sony, which I'll put a link to down below, and just type in something like cleaning mode, and then you can find out a lot more information than you'll find in this tiny little manual. All right, I'm gonna have different pacing in this course. I'm gonna slow down for very important items and take my time and go through them slowly, whereas some items are so intuitive, like setting the time and date, I'm just gonna blow through those really fast. All right, we have a lot to cover over the next 5 or 6 hours, which deals just with the camera. Unfortunately, I'm not going to show you how to balance this camera on a 3x gimbal, for instance. That would take even more time and it would take away from what we're trying to accomplish here, which is basically a technical guide. This is really not how to tell a story or anything like that. It's mostly how to run the camera. All right, since I know you guys are probably interested, I thought I would start with a really wide shot so you can see my office in terms of the lighting that I've got going on here. And basically what probably you might be interested in is the overhead shot. What we're gonna do, filming down on the camera, is the Sony RX100 Mark V, and the camera that's filming me is the Sony A7R Mark III. All right, everybody should pretty much have the same contents in their box as I do. Now, this is what's known as a world camera, meaning it can shoot NTSC or PAL, and depending on where you are in the world, it might have been shipped in one of those two modes. More about what that is later, but for the most part, everybody should be starting pretty much with the same exact contents that I have here. All right, really quickly, I'm gonna cover everything in the box. Obviously, we've got our paperwork, our manuals, got our neck strap, which I never use. I have a different neck strap. We've got our battery. Unfortunately, I don't know why they didn't supply a battery charger. You should be able to go to Amazon, B&H Photo, or maybe even Sony's website and be able to pick up the A7R Mark III's battery charger, which will work just fine for this battery. And the last two items, which is how you were meant to charge it, since we don't have a battery charger, is this AC adapter and this USB 2 connector, which is very slow. And I'm going to cover more about this later. What you want to do is go out and buy one of these cables if you want to charge your camera. As you can see here, it has a blue indicator on this side, and this is what it looks like on the other side. As I'm going to demonstrate here in a second, this cable transfers much faster than the cable that they provided. All right, if you did purchase this cable or you have the existing one that came in the box, there's basically two things you can do with this cable. One is to offload images or videos to your computer, and the other one is to update the firmware. Third item you used to be able to do on a previous version of the alpha cameras was be able to load apps to the app menu on this camera from their app store, basically. But unfortunately, we don't have that app menu in this camera anymore. Now, if you did go out and buy the newer Type-C connector and you're thinking, well, I'm just gonna take my SD card, leave it inside the camera, transfer files that way rather than using a card reader, you might think twice about it. These tests I'm about to show you, I'm using a card that can read at 280 meg per second. In the speed test that you see here, the top one is my card reader, so I'm not even using the cable. And you can see it's definitely the fastest. It's not going 280 like my card should be theoretically be able to do, but it's going at 215. But we look at the two middle connections, and you can see the USB 3.1 Gen 2 does about 135 meg, and the USB 3.0 Gen 1 port that's on my computer goes in at 120 meg. And then you can see at the bottom here, the one that's still going, that's the one that comes with the camera inside the box, and it's really slow, and I'd recommend not using it. I'd recommend going out and buying a USB Type-C cable, and that'll make your speeds go much faster, as we can see here. All right, since we have two USB ports on the camera, we can do some interesting things. If you're doing a lot of time lapses, you could take a power brick like this and plug it into the Type-C connector. Then if you have your remote timer, you could connect this into the second port, the USB 2, and you could run your time lapse that way. Now, for some odd reason, if you had these were both power supplies and you plugged them into the camera, whichever one was plugged in first will supply power to the camera. All right, the battery in this camera is much better than its previous version of this camera. But if you want more power, and let's say you're doing a time lapse, you can plug it into the wall like this, or like a brick, like we've shown before. But this won't last forever. It won't give you unlimited power if you're plugging this into an AC outlet. So of these two ports, this port right here, the USB Type-C, will drain 7% per hour when you're plugged into like a power source like this. And then the other one will drain 16% per hour. So if you're looking for much longer time lapses, I would definitely go out and buy a cable like this, the USB Type-C, and use it with a brick out in the field. All right, if you do charge using this method of plugging this to wall outlet and plugging it here to charge up your battery, unfortunately it's going to take 285 minutes to charge the battery. Whereas if you bought the additional accessory for the A7R Mark III, the battery charger, it would only take you 150 minutes. Now you're going to get a solid 2 hours of recording video out of this battery. Obviously that's going to change depending on the temperature and also the screen brightness that you're using. This is a SanDisk Extreme Pro, 280 meg in terms of speed, 64 gig in terms of size. It's an SDXC2, and you see there's a 3 inside of a U. Looking at this chart here, if you want to shoot the best codec, which is XAVC-S, and you want to shoot 4K at 100 meg, and you also want to be able to include proxy files, those are going to be recorded at the same time but at a lower resolution, you'll notice that you'll have to either get an SDXC card or an SDHC card. But the big common denominator is having a 3 inside of a U. If you buy that kind of card, you'll be good to go. I'm going to put links down below to my gear page, and you can see what kind of cards that I use. You really don't need this card. You can shoot with the card that I have on the screen that can do 95 meg. Now the reason I own this 280 meg card is I can put that into the card reader and transfer it twice as fast as if I use the 95 meg card. So if it's totally full, this card will offload in 5 minutes, where the 95 meg card will offload in 10 minutes. Just get you up in editing just a little bit faster. All right, I'm going to talk about weather sealing really quickly on this camera. Basically, the general rule of thumb is if you can't stand the rain, your camera probably can't either. So you want to protect it from utter downpours and stuff like that. A lot of people have tested the A7R III in terms of weather sealing, like Roger over Lens Rentals, I believe it's called. They always do a lot of exhaustive testing on this, stuff that I just can't do. The big, I guess, flaw, I guess you could say that this camera has, or I should say the A7R Mark III has, which is one that's designed very similar to it, is this bottom plate here. This is the weakest point of failure from what I understand. So basically, the biggest takeaway is do not set this down into a pool of water thinking that it can handle, even if it's like 1/8 of an inch of water. If your camera goes into service and they open it up and they see any sort of corrosion, I've seen a lot of comments on the forums where Sony just basically throws up her hands and say, hey, you got water damage, we're not fixing it. It's that kind of stuff. Now, that being said, the A6500 my friend had, she got it really wet. We put it in rice for about a week. We tried it. It was still acting kind of wonky. I was able to update the firmware, but it still wasn't quite working. Waited another couple of weeks after that, and it just started working again. So be patient if you do get it wet. But I would say the big rule here is if you can't stand another downpour and it's very uncomfortable for you, your camera probably can't either. Just want to mention on the screen here, since it is a touch screen and you might get a lot of fingerprints on it and you might want to clean it with a microfiber cloth or something like that, just don't press too hard. You might get some discoloration around the edges of the frame. Let me show you some B-roll of my original A7S. It's about 4 years old, and you can see how it's discolored or something's going on around the edge there. When you turn it on, you won't be able to see this, but just when you have it turned off, you might be able to see what we've got going on here. And from the Sony help guide, it says, do not press against the monitor. The monitor may be discolored, and that may cause a malfunction. Now this is a new touchscreen compared to the A7S original, so who knows, maybe they've solved that issue. All right, next up we're gonna record our very first video. So I'm just gonna take the camera, lens, white dot to white dot, pretty intuitive, click it into place, open the battery compartment door, it's keyed, it can only go in one way, so you don't have to worry about breaking anything. Same thing with the SD card, it can only go in one way. I'm gonna put it into slot number 1. Go ahead and put it in there, close the door. So what I want you to do is just go ahead and hit the record button on the back and you're recording video. And when you want to stop, obviously hit it again. Now you might be saying, Dave, whoa, that was really easy. Don't worry, we'll definitely deep dive into that much more than just hitting the record button. Now I know a lot of people are going to consume this course in a lot of different ways. I'm going to be showing you in the next section on how I set up my camera and on how I customize it. It might work for you, it might not. Everybody's different, everybody shoots different things, so you might have a totally different setup, which is fine, but I think by showing you some of the things, you might say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, or no, that doesn't work for me, or maybe I want to take that particular operation and move it to something else. Now what I want you to do is, if you just pulled the camera out of the box and you haven't customized it yet, take it around your house and just shoot some stuff. Go from like inside and just walk outside. And see how the camera changes automatically, because the way it's set up right now out of the box, if you haven't made any changes, it shoots everything automatically. And then bring it into your computer and see if the camera made some good choices. Sometimes it will, and sometimes you're like, whoa, it looks really grainy and noisy right there, and you wonder why. All right, before we start customizing buttons, I want you to press the menu button, go to the tool icon, page 7 of 7, version, and go ahead and press the select button in the center. And you can see that I'm on the body version 1.00. Disregard the lens version down here, but the body version is the most important number. If yours says 1.00, all the menus, everything we're about to do, your camera should look exactly the same. Now there's a possibility, and I kind of doubt it, if it goes to like 1.01, it might have a different menu item, but the probability is pretty low. This camera, I think it went from the A9, the A7R Mark III, to this camera. This particular menu structure has gotten more mature. So they're making less changes. Like the A7R Mark II actually went to firmware version 2.0. So they were making a lot of changes. This has gotten more mature, so I doubt you're gonna see much change go on here. Before I customize the camera, if you wanna do this, you don't have to, but if you wanna start at a clean slate like I'm going to, there's 2 different ways you can reset the camera to get it all the way back to the way you bought it, basically. This first top one, camera settings reset, this top 1 and number 2 tabs right here, this one clears basically all that stuff out in terms of the settings. If you go initialize, that's basically like saying I'm going all the way back to when I got the camera. Or if you've updated the firmware, it's going to go back to that firmware update that you had, but clean everything out basically. And this is very much similar to a firmware update, so you basically do not want to pull the battery or anything like that. Just go ahead and let it do its thing. All right, since I'm English speaking, I'm gonna press English. I'm gonna enter the time and day. I'm in Denver. I'm just gonna go ahead and speed this up so you don't have to watch this, because this is very intuitive. All right, now my camera is all reset and it should match yours. All right, the first button we're going to customize is the shutter button. And finally, after years of complaining to Sony, hey, let us record movies with the shutter button, they finally have given it to us. There's a caveat, there's a catch I want to explain. I want to show how this works first, and then I'll show you where the gotcha is. So if I'm in P mode where the camera came, if I press the shutter halfway down, you can see and hear that it acquired focus on the face. If I press the shutter all the way down, you can hear that it took a picture. Now if I go to movie mode, if I press the shutter halfway down, you can see it acquired focus around the face. And if I press it all the way down, you can say, hey, you can't do that. Warning message. And it's kind of irritating because your finger is resting on there a lot, and you'll see this come up. You'll accidentally press the shutter, and it just basically says, hey, you can't do this in that particular mode. If I press record and I press the shutter halfway down, you can see it's still acquiring focus on the face. So both in standby mode and record, you can reacquire focus basically in the frame. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. I'm going to go into the menu. I'm going to go to the second tab, page 3 of 9, at the bottom, movie with shutter. We're going to change that and turn that to on. Still being in movie mode, I'm going to press the shutter halfway down. You can see it requires on the face. I'm going to press the shutter all the way down this time. And you can hear now that it's recording video. If I press the, and here's where the gotcha comes. If I press the shutter halfway down again, you can see it's not requiring focus on the face. The automatic focus system on this camera is very center weighted, and sometimes it'll try to grab something maybe in the background, like a face in the background, and that's not what you want. You want to grab something closer. What you can do is press the shutter halfway down, but in this mode, it won't require focus. So I just wanted you guys to be aware that when you press the shutter halfway down, when you have it set this way, while you're recording, you won't be able to grab on focus like we are here to the nearest object. The best thing about this, having it assigned to the shutter button, is not having any sort of camera shake. So when I hold this up to my eye and I just move my finger and press it down, I can do it in such a way where I'm not creating any camera shake. If I take my thumb and bring it all the way to where the movie button is and press, I'll usually get a little bit of camera shake, as you can see here. Whereas here, very little camera shake. So at the beginning and the ending of your recordings won't have that little bit of a jitter. All right, next up is the power switch. It's pretty obvious. The only thing I'll say right here is by turning it on and off to maybe reboot it if you're having a problem or the camera's crashed. This camera has not crashed on me. Previous Sony cameras have had the Sony apps built into them. It would crash a lot sometimes. The app would go wonky or something would happen. But basically by turning it off and back on again won't fix the problem. A lot of the times you'll have to actually pull the battery and put it back in again and then turn the camera on, and that's more of a hard reset. This is the location of your IR sensor. You want to keep that clear if you're using a remote such as this with an IR blaster. This is the RMT845. I bought this off eBay used. I believe it came coupled with like an FS5, for instance. But the reason I like it is the time code reset. And basic, it's great. You can just start and stop recording. You can use your iPhone to do the same thing basically, but using this type of remote is just a lot easier. Okay, this is the location of your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth antenna. All right, this is pretty obvious. This is the lens release. Basically, you just press that in order to decouple the lens from the body. All right, this is your AF Illuminator. Let's say it's really dark outside and you just can't acquire focus with your lens for some reason. It's just too dark and you don't have any lights. Basically, what you could do is you could go to aperture priority, for instance, make sure you're in like autofocus single, press the shutter halfway down, acquire focus, and then go to manual focus after that. So now the focus is locked. Then you go back to movie mode, and then you would have the, as long as you don't change distance, you would have focus on that particular item. All right, next up is your sensor and your pin contacts. Obviously, don't touch the sensor, but also don't touch the pin contacts as well, because the oil and grease from your fingers can get on those pin contacts and not mate with the lens correctly. All right, this is your eyepiece, and obviously you can take the eyepiece off if you wear glasses. And right here, this rectangular area right here, if I cover over it, you can see that's the location of your eye sensor. So basically you put your eye up to the EVF, the display is going to turn off, and the opposite happens when you pull your eye away, which is great. Let me go ahead and put this back on. The little hidden feature on this particular camera they didn't have in other cameras before this one is the display. If you lift the display out just by a little bit like this, you'll notice I can cover this all day long and it won't turn off the display, which is great. Now if I pull it out like this, a lot of times what happens if you pull this tight to your body like this and you're looking down and you're filming this way, which you do a lot, the display won't turn off, which is a good thing. All right, this is the location of your dioptric adjustment. So if you need to change this for your eyes looking through the EVF, you can change this back and forth. What I'd recommend you do before you do it is actually take the lens cap, put it on, hold it up to your eye, and then start to move the dioptric adjustment around until you see that the text is nice and clear. I say put the lens cap on because you might be influenced by the things that are actually in the frame, and you might be adjusting it for like your talent that's in front of you rather than the text that's on the display. We're going to customize the C3 button next. Now all of these buttons have dual functions, one in playback mode and one what I'd call acquisition mode, like when you're trying to acquire an image. So let's go do playback mode first. I'm going to hit the play button, and here's the photo I just took. And now if I hit the C3 button, you're going to notice this little symbol right here, little lock symbol comes on and off as I toggle that on and off. That basically means that the image is protected, so if I try to delete it, it says, hey, you can't do it. You can't do that. And right now I'm in the movie mode on the mode dial. All right, and the second mode would be acquisition mode. So if I press the C3 button now, you'll notice that focus mode comes up. We've got our choice between autofocus continuous as well as manual. Well, this is really important, and I really love having this button. I don't like where it's located because my thumb has to reach over, and this is something I do a lot. And this is something we're going to assign to actually a different button later. For me, one of the great things about this camera is being able to shoot between APS-C mode, like a crop mode, or full frame mode, and be able to go back and forth between the two quite quickly. All right, to assign C3 to something different, we're going to have to go into the menu, and I want you to go to the second tab, page 8 of 9. You'll see custom key, and this is where we can set it up. But before we go into and do all this stuff, I would highly recommend, because we're going to be using this a lot, just add this to my menu so you don't have to memorize where this is located. So what I'm going to do is go all the way to the top, cursor all the way over to the star, go add an item, and I'm going to go all the way to page 22. And I'm going to go down to where it says custom key. Now what's great about this camera, they didn't have in other cameras, is you can assign all the custom buttons for movie mode, and then you can have a totally different setup for stills mode, which is fantastic. So what I'm going to do is go to custom key, and then press the center button again, and it's going to add it to the menu. And then go to page 1 of 2, and then we'll hit custom key, and then we're going to go down to C3. So let's go ahead and assign it, and cursor to page 1 of 18, and there you go. There's APS-C full frame select, and as you can see, we've got it right there. So what I'm going to do is, let's bring this up, bring this out so you can see it, and I'll show you what happens when I press C3 button now. And as you can see, as I press the C3 button, you can see it zooms in basically, it crops in on the image. And you're right here, you can see there's an actual icon that appears when you're in that APS-C mode right there. This is just a fantastic way to be able to punch in on an object if you need to without changing a lens. All right, next up we're going to customize the AEL button, Auto Exposure Lock. Do you really need that when you're recording movies? I'd say no. I can think of a lot of other things that are a lot more important. This will be the last button I customized showing you, and then the rest of them we'll just quickly go through or how I've already customized them. So I'm going to hit the menu button real quick. Boom, we're in my menu, custom key, fantastic. Page 3, Auto Exposure Lock button. And then we go to page 3, and then I'm going to go all the way down to where it says focus area. So now when I press the AEL button, you can see I have my choice of focus area, which is fantastic because when I'm shooting, my finger wants to be kind of like right here, and I can quickly change between the focus areas, which I do a lot. So I like having that right there. Again, the way I'm setting this camera up might be not working well for you. You can definitely choose other items, but I'm just kind of showing after using these Sony cameras for like the past 4 years and knowing where and like my muscle memory is, this is how I have the camera set up, and it meets my needs really well. All right, the next button is the AF on. Now a lot of people might use this for back button focus in photography, but we don't really need that in video. So what I've done is I've signed AF on to be autofocus modes, being able to toggle between autofocus continuous and manual. Remember that used to be over in C3, so basically we've just taken that and moved it over to the AF on button when we're shooting video. Now in playback mode, if I hit the play button and I hit the AF on button, which has a magnifying glass next to it, I can't change this function. Basically just focus or punches in basically where you focused when you took the still image. If I go to a movie file and I press this button, it's going to say unable to magnify because it can't zoom in on a video file, unfortunately. Having these two buttons set up in movie mode, what's great is it can just hold this up to my eye. I can quickly find where I want to change the focus area, and then if I want to quickly like change it to manual focus with the other one. So they're boom, 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 really quick, because those are the two things that I change a lot. All right, right here is your back dial. And right now, the way the camera came, if I rotate this back and forth, you're gonna see that nothing is changing in terms of the shutter speed. And this is what we want to change. So what we're gonna do is go into the menu, and I'm gonna go to tab 2, page 1 of 9. And I'm gonna change the exposure mode from program auto down to exposure mode manual. So now when I rotate the back dial, I'm changing the shutter speed. A lot of times when I'm shooting video, I'll be down at like either a 50th of a second, or I might be at 125th of a second. And I'll explain more about that later. All right, next up is the function button. And right next to it, it looks like there's like an iPhone or something like that. So let's do that first, the playback area. If I press play and then I press the function button, it's say, hey, do you want to send this image to your smartphone? So basically, if you press this, it's going to basically start the Wi-Fi. It'll transfer the image to your smartphone. We'll demonstrate this more later. And then basically what will happen is after the transfer is happening, that Wi-Fi connection will terminate. Now if I press the function button in acquisition mode, we've got a bunch of different things here at the bottom that you can choose quite quickly, which is very nice. And what I did already, just to save time, I pressed the menu button, function menu set, and I went in and basically already set these up. So let's go ahead and look at it this way, and I'll tell you what I've got here. A lot of these will be set up similar to the way I had it from my original A7S from 4 years ago. So there's certain muscle memory, certain things that I know where things are located. So they might not work for you, but I'll just explain really quickly. The first one is drive mode, and that's the way it's set by default. The next one is the creative styles. I like to change those quite quickly, so I did change that. Picture profile, I did change that. I want to get to those quickly. Exposure comp, I think that's left the same. I haven't changed that one. Next one is touch operation on the touch screen, whether you want it to be touchable or not. I like to turn that off and on and off sometimes when especially my large nose keeps hitting the screen type thing. Metering mode, I think that's by default, same location. Peaking, there's a different way I'll be able to turn peaking on and off, but here I can change the color of the peaking. Like right now it's set to white. Marker display, so sometimes when I want to shoot in a certain aspect ratio and have markers on there so I know what to fit in the frame. Next one is automatic white balance. Actually, I've assigned that to a button as well. I've just left that and I haven't changed it to anything. Anti-flicker, sometimes when I'm shooting in a gym, this is photography related. Prioritize record media. I'll talk more about this later. And then the last one is steady shot, being able to turn it on and off, especially if you don't have a switch on the side of the lens. Sometimes it's nice to be able to turn that on and off quickly. Now these won't stay the same. Summer, winter, different sports, I'll be changing those, and sometimes just before an event I might change some stuff, put it in there so I can get to it quite quickly. So yours might look totally different depending on what you shoot. All right, next up is the control wheel. I might also call this a jog wheel. So I've already customized this. I've already gone into the menu and went into custom keys and changed items here. So I'm not going to do it just to save time. I'll just show you basically what I've changed it to. The first thing is the control wheel itself. If I rotate it, you'll now notice down here the ISO is changing. Instead of having to press the ISO button, then rotate, I can quickly get to ISO much faster. For me, that's a big benefit. So all three wheels on this camera control exposure items. This is ISO, this is shutter, and the front dial is aperture. All right, let's go to the center. And where I've assigned this is to DRO. And I'll explain what DRO is later. But basically, you can raise the shadows if you need to. And right now, on the A7R Mark III, I've raised the shadows up a bit because there's a lot of dark items right here. And it's just real quick for me to just press this button and be able to choose the DRO that I'm looking for. The next button we're looking at is the display button at the top. And I haven't changed this. So basically, if you press this button repeatedly over and over again, it's going to toggle through all the different screens. The next one that I've changed is on the left side. And what I want you to notice right over here where the Q-tip is I'm going to press it, and you can see it says zebra display on. And then you press it again, zebra display off. Then the bottom one is peaking on and peaking off. I'll explain more about what zebras and peaking are later, but for me, I love being able to set up my shot. I've got the zebras turned on, the peaking and all that stuff. And then when I'm ready to start recording and actually concentrate on the image, I can quickly clean up the screen by hitting those two buttons really fast, which is great. The next one over here, where it used to be ISO, you'll see the label it's appeared, it says WB, so that's white balance. And the reason I just put that here is just an example. I don't need these labels anymore because my muscle memory is there. But if you do decide to label your camera like I have here, basically the idea here is by the time these wear off, and they will wear off after many hours of use, your muscle memory will be already there and you'll understand how to get to something quickly. And the reason I have white balance set right there is because on the original A7S that I had 4 years ago, that's where they had white balance. And my muscle memory's there and I just don't want to get rid of it. So if you want to leave ISO or however you want to set it up, I'm just showing you how and why I've set mine up. All right, moving on. If we go to hit the play button here, and we'll work through all the different dials as well. If I hit the display button, you can see that it'll toggle between all the different displays like RGB, clean image, as well as having more information here. In the playback mode, if I hit the left one, you'll see that it basically just goes to that the image back, and if I go that way, it'll go back to the image I was at before. If I go down, it doesn't matter if you're on a video file or a still image, you'll get the volume settings. So if you want to hear more of the video file, you can turn that up as well. And then the center select button basically doesn't do anything in the playback mode. All right, next up we're going to customize the multi-selector center button. And as you can see, I'm already in the custom key, and what I've assigned it to is face priority and autofocus. So if we go to here and I press the button, you'll see that face priority turns on, so you can have detect faces or not detect faces, and you can change that quite quickly. Because a lot of times if I'm like shooting, let's say, a volleyball game, and this camera is very center weighted in terms of where it focuses, and let's say there's somebody in the background, like here, you can see that it's locking on their face, but I don't want to lock out on the person in the crowd or the people that are on the bench. Basically, I want to focus on the people that are more in front of that, so I want to take that off quickly. I could do so just by turning that off, and then it won't be giving priority to faces and it'll lock on something maybe closer. All right, next up is the C4 button, and as you can see here, I've assigned that to audio record level. So let's go ahead and get into acquisition mode. If I press the trash can or C4 button, you can see that the levels come up. If I turn this all the way down to 0, that means basically we're turning the mic off. Nothing is coming into the camera, whether it's the microphones on the top or plugging in your microphone onto the side of the camera. If I turn it up to 1, and that's how I have the A7R Mark III set up right now, I've got basically the preamp or the microphone input turned down as far as I can go without turning it off. And I'm having this mic right here, the Rode VideoMic Pro, turned up to a +20. So basically the mic is doing all the work. It's providing all the voltage basically to the camera. So it's the camera is not working so hard, and it's not creating hiss, because usually these cameras don't have the best preamps built into them. And then what I do is I usually bring it up to about 20 when I don't have like the Rode VideoMic Pro plugged in, and I'm just using the internal microphones, and that's usually a great place to start. Then if we hit the playback button, obviously if we hit the trash can button, it's going to ask if you want to delete the image. All right, this is your lamp access light, and as you can see, it's blinking because I'm recording right now. So there's basically 3 things you don't want to do while there's activity on this lamp. Is you don't want to pull the battery, you don't want to pull the SD card, or you don't want to turn the camera off. If you do any of those things, like while it's recording like this, the wrapper around the video file might not close correctly, so when you bring it to NLE, it might not open. It might be corrupt or something like that because it wasn't allowed to close the video file correctly. You see this circle with a line through it? That's your image sensor mark. So basically, it's telling you where inside your camera the sensor is located. Why does that matter, really? Well, if you're one of these people that have like cinema lenses and you're always measuring from the cinema lens to your talent, and you have very accurate lens, you can basically put the tape right here and find out. Like this lens right here, if you look at the bottom of it, I think it says 1.6 feet, which translates to about 19 inches. So if I measure right here and I put my hand out like too close to the lens like I am right here, you can hear there's no autofocus acquisition happening. But if I put it out about 19 inches, you can see now it's acquiring focus on my hand 19 inches away. All right, next up, these 2 holes. This is where your speaker's located. So when you're playing back a video file, that's where you hear it from, those 2 little holes. You might be worried, and when rain falls onto here and gets water goes down inside the hole, can it go down onto the circuit board and cause a problem? I've never had that issue, and I've definitely gotten water down those holes before, and I don't know why, but the way they've got it designed, at least right there, that doesn't seem to be a weak link in terms of water getting into your camera. All right, I'm going to cover all the ports on the side of the camera. This one right here is your microphone input and it's labeled red. This one is your headphone jack and it's black. So just remember, a lot of times you'll see them right next to each other and you're like, which one's which? Just remember that red is your microphone input and you won't get confused. These doors are pretty good. I've never opened them up after shooting in the rain and found water inside of them. So they seem to be working pretty well. This is your HDMI input. I'm actually using it right now so I can see what's coming out of this overhead camera going to the Shogun, so I can see that I've got things framed up and things are in focus. So this is a very useful tool to have HDMI right there. All right, these two USB ports we've already covered already. The only thing that I haven't really demonstrated to you yet is if I plug in this USB port right here, you'll see after a few seconds that charge light between the two will turn on right in the center between the two right there, indicating that the battery is charging. Obviously, if you turn the camera on, the charge light will go out because it can't charge it while the camera is on. And when you have the camera turned on and the USB plugged in, right here next to the battery indicator to the right of it, you'll see a little symbol. It looks like an AC outlet plug. All right, this is your protective cover for the Hotshoe. I've taken it off. And as you can see here, there's a lot of pins right inside the Hotshoe. And what's cool about this camera is you can buy accessories from Sony that you can clip into place that allow you to record professional audio, meaning like XLR audio. So you can have an interface for XLRs going into it and have level adjustment, and then that audio will be passed through the multi-pins that you have right here. Obviously, if it's raining or anything like that, you're definitely going to want to keep this cover in place. And if you're curious, this particular microphone is unbalanced. I mean, I can only run it about 20 feet and I've got a 20-foot cord on it. But if I were to run it much longer than that, I would get interference, where I wouldn't be getting interference if I was using that accessory with XLR inputs. All right, this is your mode dial. I'm gonna run through this pretty quick. Obviously, right now I'm in the movie mode. This is S and Q, which stands for slow and quick. This one's scene. This one's fully auto for pictures. P, program auto for pictures. This is aperture priority, shutter priority, manual exposure for pictures. This is memory number 1, memory number 2, and we're back to movie. All right, this is your C1 and your C2 button, which I've reassigned. C1 I've changed to focus magnifier, and C2 I've done center lock on autofocus. So let's go ahead and demonstrate C1 first. So if I press it once and twice, you can see I've punched in onto her face. Press it again, it backs out again. Next one, if I press the C2 button, I can turn center lock on, and I can press the center button again, and it'll lock onto that object. And as I move the camera back and forth, you can see it's tracking not just her face, but her whole body as an object. All right, this is your exposure compensation dial. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could if you wanted to change the exposure when you're recording a movie in aperture priority mode. So if I'm in aperture priority mode, I press the record, as you can see here, and I can move it in +2, and I can bring it down -2. I can't go any more. I can't go to 3. It shows 3 on the dial, but it's not going to actually do anything. It'll only go +2 or -2. And as you can see, doing this while you're recording or anything and only having 4 stops of range is not really the best way to change exposure. All right, where you see the N there, that's where the location of your NFC antenna is located. I only have an Apple product. I don't have Android. But understand, if you basically take your Android device and you put it right up against that mark where that antenna is, you can have the camera transfer the image from the camera to your phone quite easily. But unfortunately, I've only got an Apple product. All right, here's your battery compartment door, which seems pretty obvious. But what might not be obvious is this little cable pass-through that you see right here. And this basically is for when you want to take a dummy battery, put it in, and have a cable come out and run to power, basically. And why would you want to do this? Basically for unlimited power. The options that we've shown before with USB will not give you unlimited power because it drains a certain percentage per hour, like 7 or 16% per hour, and it's going to die at some point. So if you're in a studio situation where you've got a studio set up and you want the cameras to be powered all the time, running all the time, then a dummy battery with this cable pass-through would be a good option. All right, this is the location of your front dial, and this is used to control your aperture. So as I move the front dial, you can see the f-stop number changing. All right, this is one of your internal mics. There's another one on the other side. When it's windy outside, and a lot of times I like to use it, sometimes it's got usable audio. I like to put wind muffs on my cameras. As you can see here, this is the A6500, and this works actually quite well, keeping the wind out and keeping it so you have usable audio basically. But unfortunately with these, it's hard to put wind muffs on here because of, like this is so close on this side, and I've never got them to work that well, unfortunately. All right, last part of our tour. This is the door for the SD cards. You got slot 1 and slot 2, and we'll talk more about these later as we talk about which one you can record to in simultaneous recording and all that good stuff later.